Just about that action, boss.
With the information we've just received, these have to be the most unusual suspects.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to. I'm going to answer with the same answers. So
Everybody's in the S&M.
Unusual
That's sports
suspect.
and music. Music.
Supposed to be the franchise
Sports
player.
and
We in
music.
here talking about practice. We in here talking about
Unusual suspect.
practice.
But I gotta know what's your fantasy. But I gotta know what's your fantasy. But I gotta know what's your fantasy.
Yo, sports fans, you're listening to the best show in the business, Unusual Suspects, aka us on Dash Talk. I'm your host from Unusual Suspects. We want to dive into some new things. So we're going with What's Your Fantasy? And our What's Your Fantasy is just talking about fantasy sports. It'll be baseball, basketball, football. Baseball season just started. So I just want to start out and just talk about it on the phone. You know what I mean? That's with us. That's going to be with me every week is my man, Ejon Feldier. We ready to dive into some subjects. You know what I mean? We just finished having a draft a week ago, and it's interesting when you look at fantasy and how you should draft and what's your strategy. And one of the things about Ejon is he's one of the best strategists when it comes to fantasy draft. He may not always do what's predictable, and it may sound crazy, but his thought process about any draft that he has, it tends to work. He's always in the top 2 or 3 or winning a championship every single year. So, Ejon, I just want to know, like, when you went into this fantasy draft, what was your thought process?
My thought process in this particular draft was to stay young. And a lot of the guys that I picked this time going around were guys that, get a lot of hits. I like to get hits. And if you get hits, then you can get steals. You can get, your own base percentage, and everything starts from there. So that was my thought process going in.
It was kind of crazy because in this particular draft, and for everybody listening, you got 3 different types of fantasy. You have your daily fantasy, which is DraftKings and whatever the other different outlets that people use, and you have one-time leagues, which is what we call them, which is a fantasy team that it only goes through that year. You know what I mean? So the next year, everybody's reshuffled and they're putting your team. And then you have dynasty leagues or keeper leagues, which is what we call them. And this particular league that we have is a keeper baseball league, and he picked 10th. And we had talked about Rafael Devers, and he knew that Rafael Devers was a kid that I wanted. And he picked 10th and 11th, so he had back-to-back picks in this league. We only had a 10-person league. And his 2 picks were Rafael Devers, and then at the start of the second round, he took Aaron Judge. So what was your thought process in taking Devers with that 10th pick?
Devers was a guy that was really hot at the end of the season, third base. Last year, I didn't have a third baseman all year, and I said, not this time around. I picked up Rafael Devers, and I also picked up Scooter Gennett, who was really hot at the end of the season last year also. So I wanted to make sure that position was covered. And I also wanted to spite you a little bit.
See, I had the second pick in the draft, and I'm the commissioner of the league, and he thought that it was something funny. It's like, hey man, it's nothing funny. If I wanted to be funny, I would have took the first pick. But with the second pick, I took Jose Altuve, and Jose Altuve, I deserve to have Jose Altuve on my team. Let me start by saying that, because we had a league 3 years ago, and Jose Altuve, when he was a rookie, I had him. And then we didn't keep it as a keeper league, and we just had it as a one-time league, and I ended up losing him, and I was honestly hurt. One thing about me, and this is just my personal draft strategy, period. I don't draft to win the league that year. I draft with younger players, like he talks about. I want to be on top of who are the young guys, who are the guys that you need to know, who are the guys that are perceived to be next. In my personal opinion, fantasy drafts are very similar to NFL drafts to me, because it's not one in the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds. I think the NFL draft, the fantasy drafts are one in round 12, 13, 14. Just like in the NFL, the people that are taken in the first round, that's for splash. The people you get day 2, those are guys that you use to build your team around. So, that's just my personal strategy in drafting. So I had Jose Altuve. My next pick was Freddie Freeman. His next pick, Daniel Murphy, and you got Cody Bellinger. Why did you? What was your thoughts on those 2 picks?
Daniel Murphy was a guy that I know I had last year, had a lot of success, so I had to bring him back early. Cody Bellinger was a person you had last year, and I wanted to spite you again. Some of the guys you had were really good last year, and
great players. I
had holes in those positions, so I had to fill those holes, and I knew if I filled those holes earlier with those players that were productive for you last year, I would have some success.
No, one of the things when we talk about drafts, we've been in fantasy leagues with each other for probably since I don't even know. It's at least 15 years that we've probably been in fantasy leagues together.
Oh yeah.
And it's been a lot of different things that happen. And one of the things, and I'll be completely honest, he is the guy who started this. And this goes all the way back. I wish I could remember that defensive, the linebacker's name from the 49ers. Patrick Willis. This goes back to the Patrick Willis days. So we were having a fantasy draft, and everybody know back then and it may still be the same sometimes today, when you're in a fantasy draft, defensive players don't go till round, 5, 6, 7. You know what I'm saying? And what usually happens is first person takes a defender, then the dominoes fall from there. Like you talk about changing a draft. So he took Patrick Willis in the first round, and we laughed hard. We laughed so hard and so long. Everybody talked about him like a dog. He won that league. Patrick Willis had quarterback numbers. You know what I mean? So in this draft, you look at, and I'm going back to our draft, and I'm looking, okay, who is a player that I need to take, but I can't wait too long. So, you look at drafting, you never know who's going to do what or when they're going to do it. So it's players that you have. And Ronald Acuna Jr. was that player for me. And I'm like, you know what? This is a guy I have to have. So I cannot wait too long. And I got to the 9th round, and I said, hey, it's time to start doing it. I got to make sure I get my young guys, the guys who going to be on my team. They may not come up till, well, for Ronald Acuna Jr., he'll be up in mid-April. But there's other guys who may not come up till September. May not come up till June. But you want to have these guys around. And as him and I, we're probably the 2 best at this. We'll have all of the young prospects, and we'll have them on our watch list. And we're just waiting. So every day I'm going through the watch list, and I'm making sure that all my guys are still there. You know what I mean? And I'm calling them my guys. Even though they're in the muck, we call it, you guys' waiver wire is our muck. Even though they're in the muck, we're looking to make sure that nobody gets it. One of the beautiful things that Yahoo added to fantasy this year was an NA spot. So before, you didn't have the NA spot. You had a DL spot. So if somebody got hurt, you could put them on the DL. But now you have the NA spot. So if somebody is on NA, like Ronald Acuna Jr. and whoever else, you can pick them up and you can stash them on your team. So I thought that was beautiful. But when I picked Ronald, I knew that it would set off notices for everybody. And it's like, okay, now the draft starts to change because everyone's trying to get these young guys, and like I said, he was the guy who really started reaching for guys, you know what I mean? And he would do it all the time. So I'm, looking at what you have, I know what I have on my watch list. Like, who are guys that you may have took later in the draft that you think may be available in other leagues, and people should look out for these guys?
One of the guys that I took on my team was Gleyber Torres, the shortstop, New York Yankees. Yeah. That's a guy that I really think you should stash now.
Yes.
He's going to, I mean, another guy, I think that you have him on your roster, Moncada. That's another guy that should be stashed right away. One more surprise that I'll give you is that I've been thinking about this. I haven't said it, but there's Hunter Green. There's a young prospect pitcher.
Oh yeah, like 6'4", big kid,
Yeah.
big arm. Yes.
Yes. That kid is a monster. It may be a little early to stash, but knowing one of us, we would probably stash him soon.
Yeah, another guy who, when he was 17 years old last year, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. He's the third baseman for Toronto. He's a guy you definitely need to stash. And this next person is a guy who I actually stole. Walker Buehler is a guy who's in the Dodgers system, and they look at this guy like he's gonna be amazing. So I was able to pick him up and stash him, and it was funny when we were in our draft. Ejan was looking for him in the draft and couldn't find him. So I was like, God dang, did somebody else take him? No, nobody else took him. And I found him, and I had to take him right then because I knew that if I waited, I was not gonna get him. Another thing that I look at inside of fantasy drafts is pitching, great pitching. You know what I mean? So in this particular draft, I was able to get Noah Syndergaard. I got Dallas Keuchel. I got Felix Hernandez. I got Robbie Ray. You know what I mean? This staff is not as good as the staff that I have in another fantasy league that we have, but you want to really have great pitching. It's another guy who I want to talk about, and he was on Ejan's team last year, Hoskins. I was able to get Hoskins. He was another guy.
Man.
He was on my watch list, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to pick this guy up. But I didn't really need a first baseman at the time because I had Zimmerman. So I'm like, I got Zimmerman, so I'm kind of cool. I can wait and play this little waiting game. He got called up. Ejan picked him up, and the rest is history. The kid, when he had, I don't even remember how many home runs, but it was like he hit a home run every other day. Like, it was amazing. What was it about Hoskins that made you think this is a guy I need to have?
When I was tracking him in his minor league stats, and he was hitting doubles and home runs. I mean, it's like his production wasn't just home runs. He was getting on base. I was like, man, this guy, this is odd, man. And so when he got called up, I was like, all right, let me just give him a try. And he got in the game, and he just kept hitting home runs. I was like, okay, I can't take him out of the lineup. And it seemed like he was really mature. So I left him in the lineup. I didn't even take him out the rest of the year. It was wild.
As you shouldn't take him out. So I just went to the fantasy league that I have on the other side. And here's my pitching staff when you talk about one and a half, a great staff. I got Chris Archer. I got Corey Kluber. I got Kenley Jansen, Walker Buehler, Yu Darvish, Chris Sale, Noah Syndergaard, Craig Kimbrell, and Jacob DeGrom. That pitching staff and my hitters in that league was amazing. And like I said, my team didn't start good, but I started gathering all of the young talent. I have Buster Posey. I got Buster through a trade. I had Joey Gallo, Trevor Story, Aaron Judge, and the interesting thing about Aaron Judge is we were both, like, Aaron Judge was in the muck. We knew he was in the Yankees farm system. We knew that when he got called up, we knew that he was there. He didn't really play particularly well at first, and then the next year, like, I think one of the keys to fantasy guys, when you're looking at a kid, very rarely do you have a Rhys Hoskins situation where he comes in, or a Devers situation where they come in and they're amazing when they first get there. For a lot of guys, not even Yasiel Puig, but for a lot of guys, when they call them up in June, they call them up really late, and they don't really do that well. You know that they're going to be good the next year because they're getting that experience. They're getting their feet wet, and then they come up the next year. They come up early and they're great. Chris Bryant was another one. Chris Bryant, he was great the whole time, but I had him on my watch list, and I was just waiting on it. And I remember they said that he was going to come up on a Thursday. So I'm like, okay, I think it was Sunday, and I was looking at, I'm like, okay, I will bring him up. I'll pick him up on Tuesday. And I came back that Tuesday to pick him up, and he was gone, and I was heartbroken. Cody Bellinger is another guy that I have on my team, and I was lucky enough to get him because of Ejan. I'm like, hey man, I can't wait. I got to pick guys up early. So, just a fantasy tip when it comes to baseball, the guys who are the young guys, the guys who are coming up next, pay attention to those guys, especially if you're in a dynasty league and you have an NA spot. Pick a guy up, Put him in the NA spot and just let him work. Just let him go through whatever growing pains he's going through, because you know that when the time comes, he's going to be ready to go. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll go into fantasy basketball. We'll be right back. Unusual Suspects, we back with What's Your Fantasy. We got Ejon in the house, man. He is a fantasy guru, a genius when it comes to this, and he's gonna let you inside of the mind of a genius when it comes to drafting. He's gonna give you his fantasy baseball strategy.
Well, one of the first things I thought about in this draft was getting my big-time infielders done, getting two strong people at each infield position. The outfielders I knew I could wait on a little bit because there were sleepers and guys that I knew about that I knew wouldn't get picked up till later round, so I could wait on them. What I did was I looked at the infield positions to get the younger guys, the stronger hitters, the guys pick up a lot of hits and hit for average. Then what I did was I took a couple picks and just picked up the best catchers. And I don't know why people waited on catchers this year, but I picked up top three catchers, I believe, to me. So I wanted to make people come to me in trades, starve them a little bit.
Clearly, it worked because outfielders, like you say, you can always find a good outfielder. Infielders is where it's hard. And I think most people jump at outfielders because they have big names. Like the situation I ended up, I'm like, man, I do not have a third baseman. Well, I have a third baseman, but I don't have a productive third baseman. So now you're forced to try to trade people. And like you just spoke about hoarding the catcher. You have three catchers on your team. I have one catcher who don't play every day. So now it's like, okay, I got to pick somebody else up, but all of the other catchers are not really that good. So for me, it's like, if I don't get a good catcher early, then I'm gonna treat it like a kicker. I'm gonna get it in the 7th round. In the last round, I'm gonna pick up a catcher, and then all I'm gonna do is work the waiver wire and see who's hot. You know what I mean? I'll play a who's hot situation with a catcher. And that's one of the other things that you can do. People look at situations where you're in fantasy leagues, in dynasty leagues, or one-time league, which is what we call them. And it's like, hey man, you can play the waiver wire. Just pick up the guy that's hot. You know what I mean? If you don't have big time names. Once you have big time names, you're stuck with those guys. You have no roster spots that you could use. We want to transition a little bit into fantasy basketball. And the first part of basketball is the draft. Basketball is a sport that, everyone loves. When you think about a fantasy draft, what is your strategy?
Early on, if I can get a strong guard such as a Harden or Westbrook, which is far reach. I mean, you're not going to get those guys all the time, but if you can grab one of those early, you got an early pick, grab them. I like to get centers that get a lot of rebounds early. I like to get the top rebounders and block shot guys early. For example, maybe Andre Drummond, Clint Capella, players like that. Those guys cement categories for us: blocks, offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, field goal percentage. They cement you in those areas, so you don't have to worry about them as much. When you got guards like Westbrook and Harden, they're going to also fill in with rebounds, steals, and so you start to cement areas with those kind of players, and it gets kind of tough to take you out in different categories. You'll fill up 4, 5, 6 categories with guys like that, and then you can fill it in with scores. That's been my strategy going into the last few years, and it's been pretty successful.
More than successful. The other thing that I need you guys to know, like when I tell you he's a genius when it comes to drafting, is his ability to trade. How he makes trades, how he does this, I have no idea. I have not made a trade in our league in probably 8 years, and he makes a trade for the best people. I just want to read you his roster. Russell Westbrook traded for James Harden, Andre Drummond, Clint Capella. It was interesting about Clint Capella because we watched him behind, and that's the other thing when it comes to fantasy, baseball, basketball, football, whatever it is, watch the games. You know, we watched Clint Capella sitting behind Dwight Howard, and you're like, that kid's going to be good. He picked him up at that time. Some people may be looking like, why is he picking this guy up? Well, he's picking this guy up because this guy can actually play. Dwight Howard left. It was all Clint Capella. Clint Capella is in the top of the league in rebounding and field goal percentage. Julius Randle, who's a guy that I want to get off of him in a trade some way, somehow. You know, he's playing amazing. He got Nurkic. He got Paul George in the draft. You know, he got Joel Embiid. And one of our other friends waited on Joel Embiid for 2 years, and like he just couldn't wait anymore. And he put Joel Embiid in the muck. He swooped him up. Valanciunas. You got Donovan Mitchell. We watched the Summer League, and you saw Donovan Mitchell night in, night out, putting up numbers. And then when he got to Utah, he was like the third guy because they had Rodney Hood. They paved the way. They cleared everything out for Donovan Mitchell. And he's averaging 20 points a game. You know, Al-Farouq Aminu. He had J.J. Redick, who's a guy who you can count on to get 3. He got Kyle Kuzma. How are you allowed to get these guys? Like Kyle Kuzma is put up numbers. You got to be on the waiver wire. You really got to be paying attention to what's going on. And this is something that he does like night in and night out. You know, he knows what's going on. He's great at trading. And that's why, you know, I want to start leagues with us and some of the fans, some of the people that's listening. So if you're listening to us and you want to join one of our leagues and you think that you can compete with us, come on, give it a shot. You know, so tell me a little bit, what makes you so good at trading?
When I want a guy on my team, I want to find out what the other guy wants. What does he need? And, you know, I don't like to go do a bunch of back and forth. It's more like, hey, look, what do you need on your team? If I can provide this for you and give you some extra with it, you know, let's make this happen. Because a lot of times guys they'll have a superstar on their team, but they'll have no real structure to their team. So it's like I'm helping them if they can move the guy. You know, when I made that trade with James Harden, I gave up a couple of guys that really helped the other guy's team. But at the same time, it helped bolster my team at the guard position. So everybody won in the trade. And that's the thing about trades for me is that I don't want to hurt anybody in the trade. I want everybody to win in the trade. And it's better that way. So no one feels slighted when it's over, you know, and they'll continue to trade with you and down the line.
So, and I'm not able to make a trade. So I'm not sure what my problem is because no one trades with me, period.
Also, I think that sometimes I overdo it from my side. I give them more than they want. So it's like I don't want to even create a question. You know, I want that player, and here's everything, and just take it. You know, let's move on.
How do you know the perfect timing to pick a guy up in the waiver wire, in the muck, as we call it?
I think it's just like you mentioned earlier. All of us watch a ton of basketball and sports in general. Like you said, we watch Summer League. I mean, you know who's good. You just wait. I mean, there's no secrets. Everybody that plays in our league is a genius, you know, to be quite honest with you. If you see a guy playing well Summer League, you know that, you know, through the season, sometimes you see him sub in or play a little bit. And, you know, you keep reading the news and you'll see, okay, this is about to heat up, or this even heats up. I'm just going to stash him before it even heats. I knew Donovan Mitchell was going to get in the game at some point and explode at that point. So I just put him on my team.
And and he's done it. Now you look like a complete genius, and it's crazy. So when you're looking at, I mean, we all watch college. We all, I mean, I know it's premature, but of the guys in college, right? Who do you think is a guy who will be a great fantasy guy next year?
Mohamed Bamba. Block shots, a lot of rebounds, and that's, if you're looking to fill up categories, those are the kind of guys you pick. They're defined roles already. You know what you're going to get.
One of the guys that I'm looking at in the draft, and I know you're going to disagree, the guy who I think is going to lead all rookies in scoring. Well, it's an asterisk by this, and then I'll give you the second part. Marvin Bagley, the third, I believe, will lead all rookies in scoring unless Trae Young ends up in Cleveland. I think if Trae Young ends up in Cleveland and LeBron leaves to go wherever, then I think Trae Young will have an opportunity to lead all rookies in scoring. But outside of that, I think Marvin Bagley will lead rookies in scoring. One, especially if he goes to Atlanta, and here's why. Atlanta has Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder, you put him with a guy who can pick and roll, roll to the basket. He'll be great finishing. He's so athletic. And his second jump is crazy. We were talking about it earlier. So he'll be in there rebounding. He has a nose for the ball. The kid averaged 20 and 10 in college in a situation where they were playing zone. So I think he will. Outside of him, the guy who I think it'll be is Trae Young. Go ahead, E-John.
I look along the same lines. I mean, I'm a little more hot on Trae Young fitting in somewhere as a hired gun rather than Marvin Bagley. Marvin Bagley, I'm not sold on where he's going to fit in the league yet. So I'd have to see how he fits in with the team. But like you said, Trae Young, man, if he falls in the right place, like a place like Cleveland or something like that, I mean, his role is defined, and that's what I look for, guys who know what they're going to be doing. I think another person is, if they land in the right place, is DeAndre Ayton. I think that he will actually lead all rookies in scoring.
He's definitely going to have a shot. He's more than likely going to go number one. Guy that's a little further down that I think will have an opportunity is Michael Porter Jr. if he goes to the right situation, because he's another guy who was instant offense. Like, this kid's ability to shoot the ball, his ability to play. He's not super athletic, but he knows how to play the game. His college stats are kind of blurry to who he is as a player, because Michael Porter Jr. was the number one player in the country before the injuries, before he had the problem. So I think he's another guy who could be a big time scorer, on that level. Wendell Carter Jr. is a guy who I think is going to be great. It wasn't until Bagley went down that I actually knew how good he was. You see him all the time. He's playing along. Like, he fit inside of his role. He's like, hey man, Bags is the guy. All of these guys are going, and I'm just going to be the filler. And then once Bags went out, he stepped up and did everything. Like, he can defend, which people question about Bagley. There's not really a whole lot of defensive stats. So, outside of block shots, Bagley won't get a fantasy point for staying in front of somebody. Wendell Carter is a great rebounder. He's a great shot blocker. He shoots the ball out to 3-point range. He can post up. So he's another guy that you can look at in fantasy if he goes to the right situation.
Yeah, I think one more guy that's very similar and probably a little more mobile, going to the basket, Jaren Jackson Jr. Very athletic kid, finish at the rim. Talking about second jumps, that guy's athletic out of this world. He can shoot it. He can also shoot it out to the three.
Yes, he can.
Guys like that are some of the guys that I look at. And you mentioned Wendell Carter, and I actually think that Wendell Carter actually a better NBA prospect, and people are going to kill me over this, but we're going to see in the future. Yeah.
No, go ahead. That's definitely a statement. and the beautiful part about it is now recorded. So God and country and everyone will always be able to hear. So if you're correct, we can pull the tape back and everybody will know. Everybody will know what you said, and they'll know that it's true. Another guy who I personally love, and he's not the superstar type player, but I think he'll give you great fantasy numbers just being a role player, is Mikal Bridges. Like, he's a guy who can play off a superstar. He's not the superstar with the ball, but he's going to defend, so he'll get you steals. He's going to hit naked shots, so he's going to get you threes. You know, he's athletic enough. Like, I think he's good enough to, you know, and it won't be, you know, he won't be somebody that you're like, hey man, I gotta have Mikal Bridges on my team. He may not be that guy, but if it's a week in fantasy and you need a fill-in guy, especially early on, you know, he's the guy. He's not great at creating his own shot off the bounce yet. So I think he'll definitely develop into more of that. You know, but we're gonna take a quick break. We'll finish with fantasy football and the quarterbacks, the guys that are coming in the draft. So we'll be right back after this. Unusual Suspects, Dash Talk, what's your fantasy?
Little ghetto boy playing in the ghetto street. What you gonna do when you grow up and have to face responsibility? Will you spend your days and nights in a pool room? Will you sell cats of madness to the neighborhood little ghetto boy? You already know how rough life can be, 'cause you're saying so much pain and misery. Little ghetto boy, your daddy was blown away.
Unusual Suspects, what's your fantasy? We back on Dash Talk. Before we left, you know, we were talking about the NBA and the young guys coming into the draft. Before we get out of here, we want to end it with the quarterbacks that are coming. And Ejon is here. I want to start with one particular quarterback. Everybody's talking about, and I want to look at his fantasy value. Everyone's talking about Josh Allen, but I don't want to start on Josh Allen. I want to look at my sleeper fantasy quarterback, Lamar Jackson's mobility. I'm looking at a few of his games. I'll start with a game from last year. And from a fantasy standpoint, you know, you look at it and people say whatever they say, you know, his completion percentage, you know, he can work on all that, you know, especially if he's taken by the right team. He doesn't have to play right away. But I'm looking at last year. He played Syracuse. And in the game against Syracuse, he had 411 yards passing. 411 yards. If you don't know, he's hit 3 bonuses. Okay, that's 3 bonuses if he hits 411 yards. He had 1 touchdown. He had 199 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns. So that is all of the bonuses from a passing standpoint and from a rushing standpoint. And on top of it, he had 5 total touchdowns that game. Okay, another game that I want to talk about was the game against Florida State. They won the game against Florida State. Florida State had pros. He only had 216 yards passing. He had 1 touchdown. But he had 146 yards rushing and 4 more touchdowns. Okay. Another game, the next game I want to go to was the game against Clemson. And Clemson had Deshaun Watson. Would have been the rookie of the year in the NFL had he not got hurt. And they had a team full of NFL players on defense. He had 295 yards passing, only 1 touchdown, 162 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. So he had the bonus again from a rushing standpoint. Okay, I want to go to another game against Boston College. He only had 231 yards passing, but he had 4 touchdowns, 185 yards rushing, and 3 more touchdowns. Like what this kid did, and you look at, okay, now you want to transition to fantasy. If you get those numbers from a quarterback in fantasy, you win. I played against Ejon last year in fantasy. He had 2 players, and he beat me with 2 players. He had Phillip Rivers, who had 81, and he had Keenan Allen, who had 75. Now, the numbers that I just gave you, it would shatter any fantasy output we've ever seen. I think we've seen a quarterback get 100 once, maybe.
Yeah.
He would have had over 100. Like this kid's fantasy value, and they're talking about him falling. Hey man, if he falls and goes to the right situation and he doesn't have to play right away, Lamar Jackson is the fantasy guy to look at quarterback over these other guys. Ejan.
All right. Well, it's interesting that you start off with Lamar Jackson. I think a lot of people are overlooking him, looking the guy. I'm not sure why. He's produced on, on his feet, and as far as his throwing arm is really strong. I mean, this guy is, to me, is a better prospect than all these other guys.
Yes, he
Sam
is.
Darnold,
Yes, he is.
Josh Rosen's, the Josh Allen, you name it. I think he's far and away better than those guys. But I mean, I don't know what they're looking at and how they're trying to scout the guys. But if we're looking fantasy-wise, man, if he steps right into a situation early, I think he could be really productive.
Hey, yes, he can. Yes, he can. They're forcing us out, so we're gonna have to go. Unusual Suspects. What's your fantasy with Ejan and myself, Answer Alamin, your host. We will be back next week. I promise you, with more fantasy news, more insight. Thank you, guys.
Know what's your fantasy? But I gotta 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 know what's your fantasy?